Hi, everyone. Um, Before we get started with our lesson for this week, I did want to share a little bit of this is what the office looks like because starting next week, again, if you read the extra credit information, if you can catch up any differences or changes I put in place, there may be some extra credit points there. So behind me right now, I have Baby Yoda or Grogu. I have the words right, the letters for the word right anyway, in different colors. There's a bluish curtain. Those figures in the very back are moose, a cat, and a squirrel for supernatural characters. There's a pencil. There's a picture of me and a friend with some band members. There's some pictures from a concert I went to, logo for the band Loud and Swain. Then over here, I've got like some markers and things. So there's a quick glance. In future videos, it'll be a random glance, or maybe there won't be a specific one. You just have to really pay attention to see it while the PowerPoint is being shown. So speaking of PowerPoints, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So there we go. Hey, and this week we're going to talk about plot and structure for our short stories. You'll be writing a draft. You'll be viewing this lesson and then writing your draft of your short story this week. That assignment and everything will be uploaded as well. And then next week we'll focus on revision, getting feedback, giving feedback to peers, getting feedback from peers and from me, things like that. For right now, all we need to worry about is the plot and the structure of a story. So let's talk about that. So far we've talked about covers, not covers, characters. We've talked about setting, things like that. But so we have all of our elements of our short stories together, but how do we put it together? And that's where plot and structure come into play. So plot are going to be the events in the story and the narration and the backstory and all of those things. Those are the specific events that happen. Structure is how the story puts those in order, how it handles time and space within the story to make that plot clear to the readers. It's not always in a particular order. Sometimes that order is going to change. So when we're decoding plot and structure, you want to consider what events need to happen in my story. And when do they need to happen? So if I know that character A and character B need to fall in love, or character C needs to kill character B, and then whatever events I'm having, then I need to figure out how do I build up to that and when do they need to happen? When is it going to have the most impact on my readers? And how do I want to like structure the order? Do I want it to be just in specific chronological order where it happens point A, then B, C, D, E, E happen? Or do I want to do it more thematically where a character is just kind of reminiscing and comes along things and we don't and like time is kind of maybe it's chronological, maybe it's not. Or do you want to have something where like do I want to use a lot of flashbacks in the story, or do I want to have the whole story be a flashback where I open in a scene where we see the main character where they are now, and then we see everything flashing back to where they were before in order to get to this point. Um, or do I want to do something else entirely? Those are some things you want to consider. So plot are the events, structure is how you put them together. With plot, you want to consider this idea that you have control over everything, all elements of your story. You consider pacing. How fast do these events, does the character go from event to event? Or how slowly? What promises do you make to your reader, and how do you make sure you meet those promises? If I open with something saying, I wonder what this means, or have the character saying, I wonder what this means, then I'm setting a promise to my reader that by the end of the story, that character's going to find out what it means, whatever it is means. How do I want to build up to great character moments, those moments between characters that really form the heart of a story? What sequence of events? What order do I want them to be in? And what is happening to the characters along the way? So when you developed characters last week, you want to consider what do I want to happen to them and what order and how do I want those characters to interact with each other? Things like that. So that's plot. Plot are these specific events which you can either organize ahead of time or you can write it as it goes. Sometimes I'm a seat of a pants writer. Um, They're basically some writers who have talked about how there are two particular type of writers. We have pantsers and plotters. Plotters are also, or planners, are people that really plan out a story. They have an outline. This is how the story is going to be, and that's it. Then we have pantsers. These are writers who write by the seat of their pants. They don't know what's going to happen in a story. They know what the ending's supposed to be, but how they get there, sometimes the characters talk to us. I kind of do both. I try to plot it out because I want to know what needs to be there. But as I'm writing, I'm fine with making changes. And often I wind up being much more of a pantser than a plotter anyway. So let's talk about structures. This is not an all-encompassing lesson on structure. How a short story can be structured is very unique and dependent on that story in particular. Um, we're going to talk about four major types of structures, but again, there are many, many more. If you want to learn more about any of the types of these structures, then if you're following along in the PowerPoint, there's a link in each slide to each of these. But we're going to talk about them independently. The first we'll talk about is Freytag's Pyramid, which you probably remember from our introductory lesson on writing fiction. Then we have the three-act structure, the box or the mystery box, and ABDCE, which I keep saying ABCDE, but that's not it. That's the alphabet. The structure itself is ABDCE. So let's get started. First one we're going to talk about is Freytags. Again, this is the most common structure. When we talk about plot and structure, this is what people see. It is all plot elements in a particular order. It's very chronological. It's used to increase drama and tension. We start with exposition where we get to know the setting, we get to know the characters, we get to know what's going on in this world, important people for the character. Then we have an inciting incident. This is when we start building a little bit of tension and something happens that's going to start changing what we think we know about this world. Then we have the rising action. These are these smaller events that happen in order to heighten the tension. We have a crisis. Maybe it's not being abducted by a UFO, of course, but there's a crisis where it's something bad is happening and the character has to respond to it. We get to the climax. So this is the big build up battle, whatever it is. This is the big moment of the story. And then we start wrapping the story up with falling action. These are those events that kind of show how things are starting to change as a result of the climax. What's the world like now? And we get to the denouement or denouement or the ending or the conclusion, which is where we start learning how things are going to be different from here on out. A lot of stories are written this way. The Hunger Games, the first book, is written this way as well, where we start learning a little bit about Katniss and where she lives in some world of Panem, things like that. The inciting incident is that she volunteers for her sister, so her sister doesn't have to go to the Hunger Games. The rising action is all of these moments that are leading up to the climax, the other people she fights, who's living, who's alive, who's dead. Um, then we get to a crisis. This is where they do the announcement that, hey, if two people are from the same district, then you can both win. So then we get up and she's like, I'm going to find Peeta and I'm going to save him and we're going to go home together. And then it builds up to this climax where they think they won. And then it's announced, hey, we're taking that back. Only one of you can go back. And then they choose to instead, they're both going to supposedly eat these poisonous berries instead of just one going back. Falling action is everything that happens after that. She finds out that this is an act she has to keep up throughout her entire life, that she's in love with him. And then the ending, we see that she's trying to resign herself to this being her fate. Almost as common is the three-act structure. This is very similar to Freytag's, where you have a lot of those same things, but it's written in three acts or three separate sections. The first, we have the setup. This is where we have the exposition, an inciting incident, and a plot point one or something big that's going to happen here. Then we get to act two. This is confrontation. This is where we're getting where we're starting to build up to that crisis moment, where we're seeing, hey, the lead character has to really confront whatever the crisis is here, whatever the big tension is, if it's um, another person, if it's society, if it's whatever. Then we get to act three. That's where we build up to the climax. where the big event happens and then we start wrapping it up. It's very similar to Fire Tap. And then we have the box, also known as the mystery box, also known as here are my two cats, Loki and Sylvie, sitting in a box when they wearing matching Christmas sweaters because it's a box and figure we might want to have something fun to look at today. So the mystery box, we also see this diagram in the right-hand side where it's everything seems to kind of be together wrapped in this box of the story where it's not in any particular order. You're placing a box in the world of your story and you make the characters want to know what it is. It doesn't have to be a literal box. It's some extraordinary element to this world, but you hide these details or an explanation and make it impossible for the teachers to understand what that explanation is. The characters have no idea what's going on, but they want to know. It's obsessed with solving mysteries, and it's more about the action of solving the mystery. Another way of looking at a plot, though, it may not be a mystery box. It may just be this idea that everything's kind of happening together, and instead of there being like this happens and this happens and this happens, it's just kind of all happening. This could work really well if the character is trying to remember what happened before, things like that. So, like I said, there are many ways of doing that. And then we have the ABDCE structure. This comes from Anne Lamott, who's one of my favorite writers. If you haven't read Bird by Bird, I highly recommend it. Most of you have probably read Shitty First Drafts. I'm going to add that into our folder this week as well. But basically, we begin with its action. We're drawing the reader in with an inciting incident or something major is happening. Then we start giving background after that action. Then we start developing the characters so that the reader cares about them and sees what the characters care about. The plot, the drama, the action, the tensions grow out of that development. It's very character driven and character focused. You move them along, and then everything comes together in the climax where something dramatically changes or they achieve goals. Um, After that, the things are going to be really different for the main characters. And then we get to the ending where our loose ends are wrapped up. Who are these people now as a result of everything that happened? What did it all mean to them? How do they return to the ordinary world after the events of the story have ended? Where do you take them? So those are just a few examples of stories, structure and plot. There'll be some readings as well. As always, if you have any questions, please let me know, and I'm really looking forward to reading your stories soon. Happy writing.